Bandwidth for JS Party is provided by Fastly. Learn more at fastly.com. All right, we got a fun thing happening here. A new show, JS Party.
Party time.
It's a party every day. It's a party every Friday.
It's gonna be a party every Friday.
Yes.
With JavaScript.
So you're hearing Jared Santo and Mikeal Rogers. Jared Santo, managing editor, and Mikeal Rogers, host of RFC, now JS Party.
Welcome.
Here we are.
So we thought we'd do this. I mean, launching a new show, it's cool to have a few in the feed already. So if you just come to this brand new, you may have listened to it live. We may be several months down the road and you're coming back and you're listening to episode 1 for the first time and you want to know who's behind this thing. So we thought, well, it'd be kind of cool to kind of rewind a little bit. And Jared and I can kind of sit down and talk with the host behind this. We'll have a conversation with Mikeal Rogers. We'll have a conversation with Alex Sexton. We'll have a conversation with Rachel White and kind of get to know their backstories, their ideas, plans, and fun things for this podcast. So, Mikeal, maybe the easiest way is to help people understand who you are, maybe your credentials. What people come to the show, what should they know about you?
Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, I won't get into the whole thing because that'd take too long. But I guess I'll just get into my history of the web. So I didn't really start writing a lot of JavaScript and working with web stuff until I worked at Mozilla and started working on the platform. So in this really weird way, but honestly, this is kind of how my whole career has gone. I learned it from the bottom up rather than from the front. So I didn't start writing websites and then slowly work my way down the stack. I actually started by tearing apart the web platform and figuring out like how to do automated testing of like the back and forward button and digging into the guts of the Mozilla platform. And that was kind of how I came to JavaScript and to the web platform and really kind of fell in love with it. And then was pretty primed to be really into Node.js when Node.js came out as well. One, because, I have like a networking background. And so I really loved the non-blocking aspects of it. I loved how close I felt to the network layer with it. But also it was just so nice to be working with JavaScript, in the web platform and on the back end. And when this was like the first week of Node being released that I got really into it, I literally told people at Mozilla that I was working for and writing, predominantly Python and JavaScript, that I was no longer going to write Python anymore.
You're that bullish on it, huh?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that. So first of all, I had spent maybe 4 years working on a project called Windmill, which was it was very similar to Selenium, except we had figured out how to do a lot of cross-domain stuff before they did. And rather than being in a privileged environment, I wrote this really insane HTTP proxy that basically, rewrote everything to look like it was all coming from the same domain, even when you were bouncing around different domains, so you wouldn't violate the security policy. And to get the tests going faster, I had been optimizing this HTTP proxy for about 4 years. So, I was doing everything that you could do to make something fast in Python, to make it killable when you hit Control-C as well. I had alternative versions of most of the standard library. I was digging into the guts of, how you do iterative responses, what we now call streams, but what then was kind of like a generator type thing in Python. I was really doing everything you could possibly do at both the Python level and also at the HTTP protocol level. So I was parallelizing a lot more of the requests than you would normally do. I had a lot in there to make that fast.
So were you using Python like Twisted and the evented tools so that it was something? Were you using those things and then you're like,
So I had used Twisted. So I worked for the Open Source Applications Foundation on a project called Chandler, and that was using Twisted. And there was an early version of Windmill where I tried to use Twisted, but in that environment, it wasn't that big of a win compared to just using WSGI with a generator and getting iterative responses that way. There wasn't quite enough parallelization going on with one test browser to really justify all of the overhead of Twisted. So it didn't make it much faster, but you did need to iteratively return the responses so that things would start rendering right when you got data. Yeah, but I was familiar with that. In the Mozilla stuff that I was using, I was also using Async Core, which is another non-blocking library, not as bulky as Twisted, but also much buggier than Twisted. And it comes with the standard library, so it's terrible. So I mean, yeah, I had done all the things that you can do to make Python programs fast.
Wow.
So that when Node first came out, the weekend right after, Jan Learnhardt said, "Has anybody written an HTTP proxy in this thing?" And I was like, "Oh, like that Node thing looked cool. I wanted to learn it. It's the weekend. Like, why don't I write an HTTP proxy? I know how to do that. I definitely know how to do that." And this was, when Node still had like this awful promisey thing that didn't look anything like promises today. It was really bad. It didn't really have streamed data, but all of the interfaces had different APIs. So you couldn't just plug them together. You couldn't pipe. There was no pump. I actually wrote pump later. Which was the precursor to stream pipe. It was not that great, but it was still like less than 80 lines of code so I got this proxy up. When I ran it, I was really kind of blown away. First of all, when I hit Control-C, it would just die every time. Like, you have no idea. After writing Python for like 5 years every day, writing a program and hitting Control-C and having it consistently end, I can't describe to you how great it feels. Like how warm in your tummy you get when that happens. So that was one thing. And two, it was faster than that Python proxy that I'd written. And I knew all of the things that I could do to this to continue optimizing it at the protocol level, but it was already just way faster. And so at that point, like for the things that I was doing Python, like that I was using Python for, it was just so clear that this was a better way to do that and that this had a lot more longevity. I mean, this is just starting out and it's already better. Like if I can get involved right now, I can, make sure that it, stays better. And also I think that when I first got involved in the community and started talking with Ryan and all of these kind of early people, a lot of my frustrations with the Python community, and I think that this was probably the same among a bunch of communities, but all of these languages that had kind of hit a lot of growth and traction and gotten a lot of new developers when Moore's law was in really obvious effect, where the processor speed was doubling every year. We weren't going multi-core yet. We weren't cutting things up into Docker images yet. Why would you sit down and optimize something and make it efficient when you're going to squeeze out 25% and computers are going to get twice as fast in a year? So there really wasn't this view. There wasn't a very strong focus on being very good at parallelization, like actually parallelizing IO tasks. So not thinking about threads and stuff like that. So anyway, I really felt like Python, the core community wasn't listening to what people actually needed to do with it. And when I started to get involved in Node, there was a huge focus on, well, what are people doing with it? What do we need to do to enable this big community? How do we keep the core really small and enable a ton of innovation on top of it so that, we don't have to hold anybody back? So everybody kind of had, their head on straight in the early days. And I think that it was also, I felt like it was a very good opportunity for me. At that point, I'd been working in open source nonprofits for 4 years straight. I was one of the first people to try and get people using GitHub inside of Mozilla. I'd had a lot of thoughts about building community, about how to, grow and gain a lot of traction in an ecosystem. And it was a really good place to do that work. Right? It's a brand new language with a BDFL that really does not want to maintain a giant standard library. So he's more than willing to create a great ecosystem instead. It was a good place to be. So
yeah, I mean, you're coming from a scenario where you're a user of Python, which is an established large language with a huge ecosystem around it, where you probably wouldn't have as much of a voice. Here is Node and this new, like you said, a brand new scenario where you all of a sudden your voice can be heard and your desires could be expressed. I think that's probably very.
But you can have some impact,
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, it was true then, and it's still true now, that it is so much easier to make change, especially a huge change, in something new than steering an old ship in a new direction. Like reforming projects is considerably harder than starting new ones. I mean, even the reforms that have been made, to the Node.js project, that I've been involved in getting into the foundation and all of that, a big part of that, and one of the reasons why that was actually easier, was that we literally forked it, and we had a lot of kind of greenfield opportunities to really shift things into another direction and prove that they worked before we merged all of that back into the project. So
just as we fast forward forward, so speaking of the fork, so IOJS, the fork was actually where we met you, or at least, I don't know, Adam, if you knew Mikeal beforehand, but that's when I met you, was when we interviewed you on the changelog about IOJS and the forking at that time. And then we got you back on to talk about the merging and the surprise where the community actually made it through and it was like stronger for it. Take us where you are now in terms of your relationship with Node as a project and what you're doing in your day-to-day life and your work.
Yeah. So I was one of many people leading the IOJS effort in the fork. I led an effort to get everything merged into the foundation as well. Because of my work doing that, the Linux Foundation really wanted somebody to kind of take the reins and lead the foundation in the early days, with a focus on making sure that the merge completed and that everything, remained stable. And that, there's a lot of people with really strong opinions all coming together now and trying to work together. They really wanted to make sure that everything went smoothly. So I was hired to lead the foundation and to make sure that all that stuff kind of went well. It did go really well. And I'm still with the Node.js Foundation. And now, though, now that that's really stable, from the time that we merged, the core community is, I think, probably quadrupled in size. There's so many more contributors, so we've had to continue to scale how that community works, and I've been involved in that as well. But it's certainly not in danger of falling apart or collapsing. The way that people may have been concerned in the earlier days. But yeah. So a lot. My role is much more administrative now.
That's a lot of work too that you put in. I remember when we first met you around the IOJS timeframe and like just side chats. We had a couple emails. We talked to Scott Hammond from Joyent. I got some advice from you on how to best navigate that conversation. And I just remember thinking like how busy you were. And I think you were at DigitalOcean at the time and you were transitioning to like different roles. And I was just thinking like, you do this for the community in your spare time. I couldn't believe just how much work like that open source would put out, like people like you would put out into these communities, important to these communities outside of your day-to-day. I've got to ship something. I was just astounded by it.
Yeah. That was a really crazy time. I think one of the reasons why I was working it so hard was that there weren't a lot of people that had history in the community that everyone that needed to be involved in the conversation would still speak to. I think that, a lot of what you didn't see on the surface was that it took a long time for things to get into the kind of bad state that they were in. And it wasn't just, hey, everybody is mad at Joyent. A lot of people started to also get upset with themselves. Once there's conflict at all around something, everybody will start to conflict with each other. And I'd stayed out of daily core development as of I think 2012 or something was the last time that I put code in, and focused a lot more on the ecosystem. But because I had been there early, I had a lot of relationships with all those people. Because I'd continued to do, community conferences and a lot of general community work, people mostly liked me, I think, or at least would still speak to me. And so I felt like I was one of the only people in a position to bring everybody to the table and get everybody on the same page.
There's a lot of work. I remember seeing all the issues on the IOJS org and just the technical steering committee conversations, documents being created on how the governance should be formed. And obviously that made you, fast forward to, 6 months ago when we started Request for Commits, it made you a great, co-host with Nadia Iqbal and that show, and just a lot of rich history that I think it's even been said that I think in the recent behind the scenes of the ending of the first season of Request for Commits, where it was like your stories from the battlefield. Like you come from a been there, done that, been in the war, came out slightly scathed, a happy, growing, loving community. And then now we're here at this point where we can actually talk about celebrating the direction we're going, right? Like you've been through all these bad times and now it's like, here's some good times and let's celebrate them. And so Jared and I had this desire to do a show around JavaScript for a while. We had kind of resisted this camp-based type show where we've always had the changelog. And, when we went into Go Time for the Golang community, we felt like that was our next great step, but we just didn't know when or how best to navigate that. And so when you said one day in Slack, you're like, hey, y'all should do this. And we were like, hey, we should do this. And so that was like 8 months ago, 6 months ago. I don't know, but
Yeah, it was a while back.
that sort of pushed us over the edge. And now we're here at this point. And so people may be listening to this months down the road from now, loving JS Party. We got some awesome music, a fun theme where it's a party every single week. We're celebrating this great community. It's not just simply JavaScript, it's the entire web platform, which is why we kind of asked you some stories about your backstory. But let's talk about the show today. Let's talk about where we're going with it. What do you love about the idea of JS Party?
So I'm really interested in kind of chronicling the web platform expanding beyond the browser, into IoT, into mobile, into now desktop applications. It's crazy. So not just extending kind of what the web can do, but also how we use it. Obviously Node has been a critical component in enabling that to happen, but it's an enabler. It's not the story, right? I think that if you're going to talk about IoT, Node is a part of that. Node enables JavaScript to be on IoT, but without Johnny 5, I don't think that anybody would be using it.
Right.
So that's as important. And there's even more to that story as well. I mean, Johnny 5 wouldn't have been written without Serial Port from Chris Williams, who started JSConf, and I don't think that we would have a community if it weren't for JSConf. So there's a lot going on there, and I think a lot of it is somewhat untold. And I'd really like to dig as it continues to expand. I really want to dig in deep into that story. So it took us a while to really figure out, what hosts would be good for this,
or even the format. Like, what was the best way to roll it out? And Jared, I got to hand it to you, man. The original name for this was a bit pretentious. JS Matters. We wanted it to be like a play on words, like where it is JavaScript matters, as in like it does matter, but then also talk about JavaScript matters of substance. So that was one thing. But then, you're always this, I don't know how to describe it, but like one day you're like JS Party. And as soon as we both, Michael and I know for sure it was like, yeah, that's it. Because it needed to be something that was playful. We didn't want to like come to the table with this. Sure, it's a serious podcast. We wanted to come with, this whimsical attitude to some degree where it's like, come and have fun. Let's just not sit down and like argue about things. And Michael's perspective of like, we should have differing opinions. We should have people who come on the show and we should have panelists who oppose one another in respectful ways, but can speak and not just simply agree with one another to move the conversation forward. And I think that was a good perspective.
Yeah, I think you can really only do that with a panel, right? Because you get into a rhythm where certain people will play devil's advocate or at least try to vocalize what the opposition to your opinion is saying, even if they don't believe it, right? And you really only get that rapport if you have like kind of a consistent panel. If you're just interviewing people, you really don't want to take a hostile tone with your interviewee.
Well, there's a lot of interview shows out there too. We've, the changelog requests for commits, those are very much, even though they're highly conversational, they're very much interview style shows where it's two hosts and a guest. And where this is a bit different, you mentioned panels. So we've got Alex Sexton as one of the panelists, Rachel White. We've got a couple backups we haven't exactly firmed up, but the panelist as we know it now is Mikeal Rogers, Alex Sexton, and Rachel White, and all coming from different perspectives, different paths too. So when we sit down and talk to Alex Sexton and Rachel White about their story, like we did with you today, we're going to hear a very different perspective of how they came to where they're at, and then obviously be a part of the show.
Yeah, I mean, Alex Sexton loves to disagree with me. So that he was one of the first people that
he's like, yes, can I do that on a podcast? Yeah. So everyone hears it? Sweet.
Like, even if he agrees 99%, the first thing he'll say is this 1% where he's like, yeah, you're full of shit about this. Like,
so in the pilot, it was kind of funny because in the pilot, we've got to air this at some point since I'm mentioning it. But I remember in the pilot that we had done, and this was even like 3 months back. So, I mean, we've been trying to iterate on this idea to some degree for a while now, but even in the pilot, the very first 10 minutes or 10 seconds, I think, not 10 minutes, 10 seconds, he's already like, on you in that degree, like, so I can see that you've got that rapport with him.
Yeah. He's great with that. He was the first person that I thought of for that. Also, he has a very different perspective than I do. He came in it much more from the front end world, much more from building websites and then getting involved in the web platform, and then has a lot of context around the other web platform work that I really haven't been all that involved in. But then, when I thought about having the two of us on there, it's like we're roughly the same age. We've, been speaking about the same amount of time. That didn't feel like rounded enough for me at all. So, I immediately started thinking of like, who are some of the newer voices with really, really different perspectives than we have that we could bring on. And that was how I thought of Rachel, who's amazing, who's relatively, new to the whole scene, but, is at the top of most of our speaking lists for different conferences and stuff like that. And she's just been amazing and comes from this IoT community that I think me and Alex like know about, but aren't involved enough in to really know what's going on. We know enough to know that there's a ton of stuff going on there that we have no idea what's going on.
Yeah. Well, with Rachel, I didn't know her until you introduced me to her. And my new question for her every time I see her now is, what have you built lately? What's the latest robot you've built? And she's always got something funny. And every single time it's got something to do with cats. So that's Rachel. She's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, she's also super funny. Like, I mean, Alex and her are both actually really funny. So that's great because I'm not super funny. So that'll really balance things out and make it a fun show. If you're gonna call it JS Party, you need some funnier people on. I think the first time I met Rachel, I think it was actually the first time that she spoke at I guess you can call it a tech conference, but barely. I was doing this thing for a while called JS Fest. That was like it was like a week of smaller events, so like half day events. And because you can have an organizer just kind of pick talks and not have to deal with the venue and all the other logistics, you can start to really experiment with different formats. So one thing that I started to put together before this one that we did in Oakland was this DHTML conference where it was literally like like funny talks that were sometimes somewhat fake, sometimes pretending that we're in the past, like really kind of self-referential humor type stuff. But I decided to have Jen Schiffer start curating it because she's just brilliant and like kind of lives in the satirical world a little bit with her work on CSS perverts and stuff like that. And so she found Rachel to give a talk called I'm Kind of Famous on the Internet. That was just brilliant.
Yeah, that's a good title from her, I'm sure. That's her humor too. I like that. She's got such a fun attitude. She's so much fun to be around. She's so much fun to talk to. And when I got to know her better, I totally understood why you thought she'd be a great panelist for the show.
Yeah. It's going to be a fun show. It's going to be really good.
So one thing that we're trying to do with this show, we've mentioned it's live. We have a set schedule of Fridays, afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. But if you're US centric, you're either around lunchtime or you're winding up your day. And we can all get together and celebrate, JavaScript and the web and really the things that people are doing in the greater JS community. And so that's why we want to have all these different perspectives. We want to be as inclusive as possible. Everybody can come, share their opinions. There'll be a live chat room. So that'll be a really fun way of interacting with the host. And I'm sure, Mikeal, as you guys get to become more familiar with it, you'll get better or worse at, responding to people as the thing goes on. So it's going to be lots of fun. But in light of our desire not to just be like node specific, not to be just like hardcore, like people talking about V8 or, or just talking about front end, for instance, new right. APIs that are in the browser. We want to like make something for all of us, front enders, CSS, design people, JavaScript, hardcore programmers. If you touch the web platform and JS is any part of your life, like this show is for you. At least maybe time will tell. That is our goal, whether or not we achieve that. And so in light of like those desires and what we're trying to pull off in terms of a celebration every week where we can all come together and talk, what are some of the things people can expect in terms of topics, conversations that we'll be having? What do you expect? Of course, this is all I'm asking you to prognosticate because it'll probably change as we go. We are iterating. It'll probably be different by the time this ships than it is right now. But what do you expect in terms of topics that people can come and listen about?
So I think that we will, because we're doing it every week and we're trying to be really consistent, I think that we will pick up things that are topical, right? So if some big, web news thing goes out or some, new library ships that everybody's talking about, like that will end up being a subject for sure, right? Like we will kind of follow that and that'll be I think that'll be kind of fun. In particular, like I don't know about you, but whenever I see people talking about an announcement like that goes out, and I know a lot about it, everybody misses all of the context and all of like the subtlety. And there's a couple of podcasts like in the political space and in the economic space that do a really good job of deconstructing that and really coming back to like, what does this really mean? What's some of the background that's going on here? And so I hope that we can actually do that as well with some of these news items. I think that we have enough people and context to really suss that out. And I think I also want to try, and this is a really difficult thing to do, but really try to unwind a lot of stuff that's going on in the web and explain it from the ground up. Like we start to throw around jargon and like entire words for like entire sets of specifications or work that's going on, like everybody knows what we're talking about, and at the end of the day most people actually don't know what that means. Like I mean even progressive web apps, like no, I mean
I still don't know what that means.
right. Well,
I'm pretty sure I built a couple of them, but I don't know what it means.
Right. And like you'll see people, like Nolan Lawson does this sometimes. Mariko does an amazing job of this. She's a programmer in New York. But she will, take a word or a subject that people throw around a lot that she's noticed other newer people are kind of afraid to ask what that means. And she'll dig into the entire history of it and explain it kind of from the ground up for people that don't know what's going on. And that turns out to be pretty much everybody. Like when Nolan Lawson wrote that piece on progressive web apps, I think that everybody went, oh God, finally I can stop pretending like I know what this means. Like there's actually this explainer now. And so I really want us to try to do that as well. So, when we bring up a news item about, some topic in some area, we actually unwind it enough to go like, well, let's back up. Like, how did this start? What does this actually mean?
You can teach all of us how WebRTC works.
I don't know if you can explain that in a podcast. It's incredibly, it is one of the more overly complicated parts of the web.
Visuals required.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Whiteboard.
I think that we could. Yeah, I think that we could get in. We could probably get into some of that. I think that I could explain parts of that. I think that you just have to talk about the data part and the media part kind of separately. That's the difficult bit.
Well, don't start teaching us now or we'll never get out of here.
Okay. All right.
So who should listen to this show? Like if someone's listening to this right now, what kind of thing are they doing? What role do they play? I know you mentioned web platform, but that's one of those jargons you mentioned that you may assume I'm part of that or I'm not part of that. Is it simply I build websites, so I listen to this podcast? Who is the best fit for the kind of thing we're doing here?
I think that if you work on the web, if you use web technologies to build anything, if you, whether CSS or JavaScript or anything, if you work on IoT, on serverless, on any of that, I mean, we're going to get into all of those subjects. And, if we aren't doing enough job of unwinding these topics so that everybody, is on the same page, give us that feedback and we will continue to work to do a better job to unwind that enough so that everybody can understand it. Because especially with the breadth of the topics that we're talking about, even if you really understood one thing that we wouldn't talked about, you wouldn't understand the next. I mean, you're not going to have, the deep low level network knowledge and the CSS knowledge, right? So I think that if we're not doing a good enough job of explaining it, just let us know and we will continue to get better at that and continue to actively unwind this stuff so that everybody working on the web can really learn more about this, understand more of this. And as all of these new news items and frameworks and blah, blah, blah come out, I really hope that we can kind of share more of what the quote unquote insiders know about this with the general public as well. Because there's just, I mean, having been in this for so long, you really forget how much insider knowledge there is around all of this that is required for, your context if you're going to be involved.
Well, Jared mentioned earlier about a live chat room. That live chat room is actually Slack. And we're piggybacking off of some new things we're changing about changelog community. We used to charge for accessing changelog community. It felt so weird. Jared, I don't know about you, but man, when I was at All Things Open and I was sharing just some new stuff that we had done. This is October when we rebranded a new site, all that good stuff. I was trying to get people to, desire to be a part of our community. And and be involved. And every time I was telling people it was like $20 a year, it just felt weird. Like, sure, join the community, but you got to pay. Well, now it's free. We're opening it wide up. You get access to our Slack community. And part of that Slack community is the JS Party channel. Live every Friday, we'll do this show. And to get access to Slack while you're listening live, head to changelog.com/community. And back to what you said, Mikeal, about iteration. Like, I think it's going to be hard not to iterate this thing to where the community desires it to go, is because they're going to be directly involved if they choose to be. And, that channel, I'm sure, will be pretty active. I'm sure we'll have lots of feedback readily available every single week about what we're doing, what topics we're talking about. And I'm sure that we'll do things around opening it up so where that the community can actually participate in topic suggestion and things like that. So we very much want this to be, in my opinion, something that's like for the community, and if it doesn't serve that, then we're missing the mark on what we're trying to do here, because you can't celebrate unless you got some people with you.
Right. I agree.
At least that's, last time I've been to a party, it wasn't just me.
Yeah.
But to reiterate, live every Friday. If you're on the Pacific Coast, West Coast, noon. If you're on Eastern, it's 3 p.m. It will be live at changelog.com/live. We're on Twitter. Our Twitter looks jacked up right now. So if you go there right this very second, like literally this second, as we're recording this, it's jacked up. But it's JS Party FM on Twitter. We also will be at changelog.com/JS Party. You can subscribe in iTunes, any other thing you could think of, RSS. You can listen online. You can listen live, which is what we encourage people to do, because that's where the fun is at. And we've got some awesome music from Breakmaster Cylinder. We've worked so hard with Breakmaster to get this music to be true party. Any feedback y'all want to share about your thoughts on this music?
Can we listen to it right now?
Oh yeah.
Can you? Yes. Okay. So play it and then we'll give some feedback.
Give me a second. Let me set this up. All right. Here we go.
I'm bouncing already.
I know.
It gets funky too.
Wow. Oh, wow. That's awesome. I'm so pumped. I'm like actually disappointed that now I don't get to do an episode of JS Party.
I know, right?
It's like getting me in the mood.
Yes. Well, the cool thing too is we're actually setting up a soundboard. So when we have this show going on, we can actually play that music live for everyone. And one thing we talked about doing, which is sort of unplanned for this, Meet Mikeal conversation, was taking questions from the community, especially if they're audio versions, and actually having them on the show. So that soundboard might actually help us, take some audio submitted questions and actually play that audio live for everyone, and then include it obviously in the produced show that goes out on the podcast feed. So
that's awesome.
We played the full track for you, so the listeners listen to this. That was the full track. It's 1 minute and 45 seconds long. I hope you love it. We put a lot of work into this. The album art was meant to show you that this is truly a party. A disco ball, you can't not party without a disco ball. Okay, you have to have a disco ball or it's not a party or a party worth being at. All right, Michael, anything else you want to share with the listeners who have either brand new to this show as we're launching it or coming to this first episode months down the road, catching up?
Good question. No. I can't think of anything. Nothing? Actually. No.
I just hope that
welcome to the party.
Yeah, welcome to the party for sure. I just hope that our ideas today are true 3 months from now.
Yeah, I think that we're gonna just kind of follow where people want us to go, and I think that we should also not be afraid to try some stuff out. I mean, in the planning for the show, we tried a lot of stuff that didn't quite work. It was a good idea, but wasn't quite there or ready or whatever. I even wrote a bunch of custom code to play around with some ideas, and then once you're really using it, it's like this is like 90% there, but not enough to really use and rely upon. So yeah, I like the idea of having lots of different modes of engagement. It'd be great to set up some kind of some audio voicemail service or something where we can just get listener asked questions that we then ask on the air. That'd be great.
There's 2 ways that can happen actually. So we actually have one way, which is probably the easiest way. It may not be the long-term preferred way, but you can call 888-974-2454, which is actually 888-974-CHLG for changelog. So you can call that and leave us a voicemail. We use Grasshopper for our virtual voicemail system and stuff like that. So you can call there and just leave a message and we get MP3s dumped to us, although they are lower quality. Or you can simply just open up QuickTime or something and just record something and then email it to somebody or drop it on Dropbox and tweet us or whatever, and we'll grab those. We'll find a more formalized way for it in the future. But if you're listening to this and you want a way, that's a good way to start at least. And we'll go from there. Well, in lieu of getting this thing wrapped up, we've got live every Friday at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, changelog.com/live. Follow JS Party FM on Twitter, or also head to changelog.com/JS Party. Subscribe, don't miss a show. And Michael, this is fun. Thank you for doing this, man.
Yeah, anytime.
All right, that was the first of the Meet the Host episodes here on JS Party. Mikeal Rogers taking the first show. Next up is Alex Sexton, and after that, Rachel White. Hope you love this show we're going to produce here. Once again, changelog.com/JS Party. Subscribe, don't miss a show. Also head to changelog.com/community. Sign up, get access to Slack, and make sure you're in the JS Party channel every Friday when we do the show live. Once again, changelog.com/community. And thanks for listening.